If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Determining the greatest MMA fighter of all time is a highly subjective matter that's influenced by a variety of factors, including weight class, era, competition, style, and personal biases. The sport is also still relatively young, so the metrics and criteria for determining greatness are continually evolving. George St. Pierre. Organizations, UFC. Strengths, incredible wrestling all-around game, fought top competition. Accomplishments, 2-division champion, most welterweight title defenses. Anderson Silva. Organizations, UFC, Cage Rage, Pride. Strengths, striking, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai. Accomplishments, longest title reign in UFC history, multiple highlight, real finishes. Fedor Emelianenko. Organizations, Pride, Strikeforce, Razin, Bellator. Strengths, striking, ground and pound, Sambo. Accomplishments, undefeated in Pride, multiple heavyweight titles, fought top competition. Jon Jones. Organizations, UFC. Strengths, reach, striking, wrestling. Accomplishments, youngest UFC champion, most light heavyweight title defenses. Khabib Nurmagomedov. Organizations, UFC. Strengths, wrestling, Sambo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Accomplishments, undefeated record, lightweight champion, dominated top competition. Demetrius Johnson. Organizations, UFC 1 championship. Strengths, well-rounded, striking, wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Accomplishments, longest title reign in flyweight history, one of the most technically sound fighters ever. Jose Aldo. Organizations, WEC, UFC. Strengths, striking, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Accomplishments, longest featherweight title reign, considered one of the best featherweights of all time. Daniel Cormier. Organizations, UFC, Strikeforce. Strengths, wrestling, striking. Accomplishments, 2-division champion, only fighter to defend titles in 2 weight classes. Factors like strength of schedules, finish rate, and speed of finishing top 10 opponents. Strength of schedule, Fedor Emelianenko, George St. Pierre, and Jon Jones have fought and beaten numerous top-ranked opponents. Finish rate, Anderson Silva and Fedor Emelianenko have high finish rates. Speed of finishing top 10 opponents. Fighters like Anderson Silva and Conor McGregor have finished top-ranked opponents very quickly in some cases. The GOAT conversation often takes these factors into account but is ultimately subjective. Some value long title reigns, while others may value fighters who have excelled in multiple weight classes or organizations. There's no definitive answer, but each fighter on this list, and many not on this list, has a strong case for being considered the greatest of all time. Collecting and analyzing exhaustive statistics on how quickly fighters have finished top 10 opponents, or even who qualifies as a top 10 opponent at the time of a fight, is quite challenging. Rankings change over time, and MMA is a sport where fighters from multiple organizations could be considered top 10, but never have the chance to prove it against one another. However, George St. Pierre. Record, 26-2. Notable wins, Matt Hughes, X2, BJ Penn, X2, Carlos Condit, Nick Diaz, Michael Bisping. St. Pierre faced an enormous number of top fighters in his career, including Hall of Famers and perennial top 10 talents. Anderson Silva. Record, 34-11-1. Notable wins, Rich Franklin, X2, Dan Henderson, Vitor Belfort, Forrest Griffin. Silva's UFC title reign saw him defeat multiple top 10 middleweights, often in spectacular fashion. Fedor Emelianenko. Record, 39-6-1. Notable wins, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, X2, Mirko Cro Cop, Mark Coleman, X2, Tim Sylvia, Andrei Arlovsky. Fedor faced a plethora of top 10 heavyweights during his time in Pride and other organizations. Jon Jones. Record, 26-1-1. Notable wins, Mauricio Rua, Rashad Evans, Daniel Cormier, Alexander Gustafsson, X2. Jones's record is packed with wins over top 10 light heavyweights, including multiple former champions. Khabib Nurmagomedov. Record, 29-0. Notable wins, Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Rafael dos Anjos. Khabib retired undefeated, having faced a series of top-ranked lightweights in the latter part of his career. Demetrius Johnson. Record, 33-1. Notable wins, Joseph Benavidez, X2, Henry Cejudo, John Dodson, x2. Johnson's competition may not have been as storied as others on this list, but he still defeated several top 10 flyweights. Jose Aldo, record 29-7. Notable wins: Uriah Fair, Frankie Edgar, x2, Chad Mendes, x2. Aldo's career in WEC and the UFC saw him consistently beating top 10 featherweights. Daniel Cormier, record 22-3-1. Notable wins: Anthony Johnson, x2, Alexander Gustafsson, Stipe Miocic. Cormier has defeated multiple top 10 opponents in both the heavyweight and light heavyweight divisions. It's difficult to pin down exactly how quickly each of these fighters has defeated top 10 opponents, but many have a range of first-round finishes to decision wins. For example, Anderson Silva has several first-round finishes over top-tier opponents, as does Jon Jones. Khabib Nurmagomedov often wore opponents down before finishing them in the later rounds. The criteria for greatest of all time will differ from person to person and may involve factors beyond simple stats. Overall, the fighters listed have consistently faced and defeated top-level competition, often in dominant fashion, and have set various records along the way. Cross-referencing similar opponents and their finish times can provide some insights, but it's essential to consider the context. Matchups make fights, and the timing of when a fighter faced an opponent matters, such as, was the opponent in their prime? Here are a few examples of similar opponents faced by fighters often mentioned in GOAT discussions: Daniel Cormier and Jon Jones. Alexander Gustafsson. Jones won by unanimous decision in their first fight in Taiko in the third round in their second fight. Cormier won by split decision. Anthony Johnson. Cormier won both fights by submission, rear naked choke, in the third and second rounds. Jones was scheduled to fight Johnson, but the match never happened due to issues outside the octagon. George St. Pierre and Matt Hughes. BJ Penn. St. Pierre won by split decision in their first fight and by toe in the fourth round in their second fight. Hughes lost by submission, rear naked choke, in the first round. Anderson Silva and Vitor Belfort. Rich Franklin. Silva won both fights by 2 in the first and second rounds. Belfort lost by unanimous decision. Dan Henderson. Silva won by submission, rear naked choke, in the second round. Belfort lost by unanimous decision. Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson. Rafael dos Anjos. Khabib won by unanimous decision. Ferguson won by unanimous decision. Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo. Joseph Benavidez. Johnson won both fights, one by split decision and one by KO in the first round. Cejudo lost by split decision. These are just a few examples, and each comes with its own context. The quickness of a finish doesn't necessarily indicate a better performance, especially considering stylistic matchups, fight circumstances, and other factors. It's one data point among many when assessing the greatness of an MMA fighter. The determination of which MMA fighter has beaten the most top 10 opponents can be quite difficult to quantify definitively for a few reasons. Rankings change over time, and not all organizations have formalized rankings. A fighter who was considered a top 10 opponent at one time may not be at another. Various organizations have different levels of competition, so a top 10 opponent in one may not be in another. That said, here are some fighters who have faced a large number of highly ranked opponents over their careers. George St. Pierre. GSP has faced a myriad of top 10 fighters over his career, including the likes of BJ Penn, Matt Hughes, Carlos Condit, and others. His reign at welterweight was filled with top-level competition. Jon Jones. Jon Jones has fought a significant number of top-ranked light heavyweights, including Daniel Cormier, Alexander Gustafsson, Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans, and others. His record against top-ranked opposition is remarkable. Anderson Silva. During his prime, Anderson Silva fought many top 10 opponents, including Rich Franklin, Dan Henderson, Chael Sonnen, and Vitor Belfort, often in spectacular fashion. Fedor Emelianenko. Fedor's career in Pride, Strikeforce, and other organizations saw him fight a slew of top 10 heavyweights, including Mirko Cro Cop, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, Mark Coleman, and Tim Sylvia, among others. Daniel Cormier. DC has fought a considerable number of top 10 fighters in both the light heavyweight and heavyweight divisions. His notable opponents include Stipe, Miocic, Jon Jones, Alexander Gustafsson, and Anthony Johnson. Khabib Nurmagomedov. Khabib fought and defeated several top 10 lightweights during his career, including Rafael dos Anjos, Conor McGregor, and Justin Gaethje, among others. There isn't a single database that accurately measures and ranks fighters based on the number of top 10 opponents they've beaten across all organizations. Each of these fighters has faced a variety of highly ranked opponents, and each has a strong claim to being among the greatest of all time based on the level of their competition. The criteria for greatest of all time will differ from person to person and may involve factors beyond the sheer number of top 10 wins. Even the greatest fighters have setbacks, and losses to unranked or lesser-known fighters can happen for various reasons, including injuries, lack of preparation, or simply an off night. Here are some fighters commonly mentioned in the greatest of all time, GOAT, conversations who have had such losses. Georges St-Pierre, lost to Matt Serra. Gisp was heavily favored, but lost to Serra by Tico in the first round at UFC 69. Serra was not considered a top 10 welterweight at the time, but had won a title shot through the reality show, The Ultimate Fighter. Anderson Silva, lost to Ryo Shonen and Daiju Takesi. Before his UFC career, Silva lost to relatively unknown fighters, Ryo Shonen and Daiju Takase, in Pride and other promotions. Fedor Emelianenko, lost to Tsuyoshi Kosaka. While this loss came via a doctor stoppage due to a cut just 17 seconds into the fight, Kosaka was not considered a top heavyweight at the time. Daniel Cormier, no such losses. All of Cormier's losses came against top-tier, often champion-level competition. John Jones, no such losses. Jones's sole loss is a disqualification against Matt Hamill, who was a respectable competitor but not unranked. Jones was dominating the fight, but got disqualified for illegal downward elbows. Khabib Nurmagomedov, no such losses. Khabib retired undefeated. Demetrius Johnson, lost to Brad Pickett. Before finding his home at flyweight, Johnson lost to Brad Pickett in a bantamweight fight. Pickett was a good fighter but wasn't considered top 10 in the world at the time. Jose Aldo, lost to Luciano Azevedo. Before joining the UFC, Aldo suffered a loss to Luciano Azevedo in Jungle Fight. Azevedo was not considered a top featherweight. It's worth noting that a loss to an unranked or lesser-known fighter doesn't necessarily tarnish a great fighter's legacy. Many of these fighters avenged their losses or went on to have illustrious careers that more than compensated for earlier setbacks. Determining the MMA fighters with the most wins against opponents who outweighed them is a difficult task for several reasons. Weight cutting. MMA fighters often cut weight to make a particular weight class, only to regain that weight before the actual fight. This can make it challenging to know who actually outweighed whom come fight time. Incomplete information. Weight statistics for fight day aren't consistently reported, making it hard to definitively say which fighters have the most wins over heavier opponents. Career length and frequency. Fighters who have had long careers or who frequently take fights at higher weight classes will naturally have more opportunities to win fights against heavier opponents. That being said, some fighters are well known for their willingness to face, and often beat, larger opponents. DJ Penn. He has fought in multiple weight classes, ranging from featherweight to welterweight, and even fought a one-off at middleweight against Rodrigo Gracie in K1. His wins at higher weight classes were especially noteworthy, given his natural size as a lightweight. Randy Couture. Couture has competed at both light heavyweight and heavyweight, despite having a frame more naturally suited for the 205-pound division. He's captured the UFC heavyweight title on 3 occasions and light heavyweight title twice. Anderson Silva. Silva, primarily a middleweight, has stepped up to fight larger opponents at light heavyweight multiple times and has been successful in most cases, notably against Forrest Griffin and Stefan Bonner. Dan Henderson. Henderson has competed in multiple weight classes and has several wins over fighters who outweighed him. He has fought as a middleweight, a light heavyweight, and even a heavyweight in his early career. Georges St-Pierre. While primarily a welterweight, GSP's comeback fight against Michael Bisping for the middleweight title was notable. Bisping, a natural middleweight, likely outweighed GSP on fight night, but St-Pierre still emerged victorious. Fedor Emelianenko. Often outweighed in the heavyweight division due to his relatively small size for the weight class, Fedor has numerous wins over much larger opponents, including Tim Sylvia and Hong Manchoi. Given the issues around weight cutting and the inconsistency of fight day weight reporting, it's difficult to make a comprehensive list. However, these fighters have shown a willingness and ability to compete against and beat larger opponents. The Dark Horse, Kazushi Sakuraba. Kazushi Sakuraba, affectionately known as the Gracie Hunter or the IQ Wrestler, is a legend in the world of mixed martial arts, particularly for his contributions to the sport in Japan and his role in the Pride Fighting Championships. While he may not have the same undefeated record as a Khabib Nurmagomedov or the multi-divisional titles like Georges St-Pierre, Sakuraba's unique career gives him a certain GOAT, greatest of all time, mystique for several reasons. 1. Gracie Hunter. One of Sakuraba's most significant contributions to MMA was his series of fights against members of the Gracie family, the first family of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He defeated Royler Gracie, Renzo Gracie, and Ryan Gracie, but his most famous win was a 90-minute marathon against Royce Gracie, the UFC's first superstar. At the time, the Gracies were considered almost invincible, especially in the realm of grappling. Sakuraba showed otherwise. 2. Versatility and creativity. Sakuraba was not just a one-trick pony. He had a well-rounded skill set. Coming from a professional wrestling and catch wrestling background, he was comfortable on his feet and on the ground. He was known for his unorthodox techniques, including cartwheel guard passes and jumping stomps, which showcased the depth of his fighting IQ. 3. Fought larger opponents. Sakuraba often fought well above his natural weight class. He has competed against heavyweights like Mirko Cro Cop, Kevin Randleman, and Quentin Rampage Jackson. While he didn't always win these matchups, the fact that he was willing to take on significantly larger opponents speaks volumes about his courage and skill. 4. Durability and resilience. Sakuraba was known for his incredible toughness. He fought multiple times in single-night tournaments and has a list of injuries that would make most people cringe. Yet he always showed up to fight and gave it his all, often going the distance in grueling battles. 5. Impact and legacy. His impact on Japanese MMA and the sport globally cannot be overstated. He was one of the faces of Pride, a promotion that was at one point more popular than the UFC. He helped popularize MMA in Japan and inspired a new generation of fighters. 6. Iconic moments. Sakuraba provided some of the most memorable moments in MMA history, whether it was his grappling exchanges with Carlos Newton, his Kimura submission over Renzo Gracie, or his spirited though losing effort against Wanderlei Silva. Drawbacks. While his record isn't flawless and he faced multiple losses later in his career, often due to mismatches in size and youth, the sheer volume and variety of his notable victories remain impressive. For these reasons, while he might be a dark horse candidate in the GOAT conversation, Kazushi Sakuraba certainly deserves to be in the discussion. His impact on the sport, his victories over legendary opponents, and his fearless approach to fighting all make a compelling case for his inclusion in any GOAT debate. Rankings. Here are some fighters often included in the GOAT discussion, along with rough percentages indicating their likelihood of being considered the GOAT by the broad MMA community. Georges St-Pierre, 22%. Dominated at welterweight and even captured the middleweight title, defeating Michael Bisping. Strong pound, 4-pound credentials. Jon Jones, 20%. Virtually undefeated, taking on all comers in the light heavyweight division and even beating a few heavyweights early in his career. Khabib Nurmagomedov, 16%. Retired undefeated and dominated a stacked lightweight division. Never faced larger opponents, but his fork skills are unquestionable. Anderson Silva, 14. Dominated at middleweight and took fights at light heavyweight, defeating larger opponents like Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar. Fedor Emelianenko, 10%. Often fought larger opponents in the heavyweight division and dominated during his prime. Daniel Cormier, 7%. Won titles at light heavyweight and heavyweight, facing and defeating larger opponents like Stipe Miocic. Demetrius Johnson, 5%. Despite being in a lighter weight class, his skills are often touted as some of the best forp in the sport's history. Randy Couture, 3%. One of the original multi-division champions, frequently beating larger opponents. However, his overall record isn't as dominant. Kazushi Sakuraba, 2%. A dark horse pick, mainly due to his wins over larger, highly skilled opponents, most notably the Gracies. BJ Penn, 1%. Fought and won in multiple weight classes, but has a mixed late career record that affects his standings. Jose Aldo, 1%. Dominated at featherweight, but never competed in different weight classes to take on larger opponents. Conor McGregor, 1%. Won titles in 2 divisions but has been inconsistent recently, and his victories over larger opponents are limited. Stipe Miocic, 1%. Most title defenses in heavyweight history, but the division is volatile and he hasn't fought in lighter divisions to prove fork skills. Matt Hughes, 1%. Dominated at welterweight but never competed outside of his weight class to take on larger opponents. Wanderlei Silva, 1%. A dominant force in Pride, known for his aggressive style and willing to take on all comers regardless of size.